Hey Bethel Youth, this is Mike, as promised, trying to stay in touch with you guys and kick off the year with a study about Shane Claiborne's book. It's a really interesting read, and I was psyched to read it this summer, and it really helped me wrap my brain around some stuff that I was struggling with earlier in the summer in my walk. But I want to give you a little sense of where I am right now. I'm standing on a bridge right outside of Georgetown, and as I pan around a little bit, you can see behind me, that is the Washington Monument, and over there, the Kennedy Center, that's the Watergate Hotel, and all around me to the left here is Georgetown University. We are right here in the heart of it. So in this book, I think what's really interesting is Shane comes at faith from a really different place than most people that write books about their struggle with faith. He talks about his childhood in Tennessee as a conservative guy who basically met all the requirements to be what he called a believer. He talks about going to Bible camp and Bible school and really buying into the whole deal. But while he was a believer, he didn't really know what being a follower meant. He was totally committed to his faith and did everything that was asked of him. And I guess he pretty proudly wore the label of believer, but the follower thing just wasn't happening. He felt like nobody was actually telling him, what does a follower of this actually do? So he started to just gorge himself, and he comes up with this really interesting term of spiritual bulimia. He was gorging, loading up on spiritual reading and all the paraphernalia that go along with Christianity, but just like bulimics who eat a lot of food and get no nourishment from it, he was really missing something. He didn't feel like he owned his faith, like it meant anything to him. Something was clearly missing. When he started studying the Bible a little more to figure out what exactly it was he was missing, he realized if you look at the Bible, Jesus was kind of nuts. And what Shane took away from everything he read was that Jesus was pretty much a crazy man who was turning the world upside down. He had a totally different take on how things should happen, and it's completely against everything we see in the modern church, because what do we see when we talk about what the church looks like today? There's some clear images of what church seems to be in the modern perception of most people. Another word for crazy, of course, is radical, and that's where Shane's description of radical comes from, because Jesus really was this kind of crazy radical guy who hung out with the poor, he talked to the poor, he worked with the poor. That's who he wanted to touch. He did weird things like spit into his hands to heal people, and that was nothing like what most people thought that the Son of God, the ruler of the universe, should be doing when he came around. And yet one of Shane's points is we seem to have taken Christianity and we've made it super safe today, and we've wrapped it in so many layers of stuff that we've lost that whole idea of Jesus being in the essence of the mud and the muck and spitting in his hand to heal folks. One of Shane's key points is that this isn't a story of somebody that had a really messed up life and then got converted. His story is of a guy who had his life together. He was popular, knew what he was doing, everything was going on, but then he realized that Jesus was something else. But to be a follower meant something completely different, and in his words, Jesus pretty much wrecked his life. So to go in the opposite direction, Shane became sort of a crazy Jesus radical. He calls it a Jesus freak. He tried the charismatic thing, and he got so sucked into it that he bought it hook, line, and sinker. And he went all in, and he became that guy who stood on the street corner and was a wild man, crazy on fire for Jesus. But what he found again at the end of the day was that he didn't really feel like he was being a follower. It was still about stuff other than what Jesus was talking about. And that thing that he was missing, that gaping hole in his self and his identity, his need to be truly spiritual, was not being filled by being the crazy charismatic dude either. In fact, he got so crazy about it that he kind of got disenchanted, got even more frustrated with the church again, and started feeling a little bit like a used car salesman, like what he was doing was really not what he was supposed to be about. But in spite of all that, the guy still had a curiosity about who this Jesus fellow was and what following him might actually look like. So of course the next thing he did was go to college and try to figure it out there. He got super involved in stuff when he went to college, but it still didn't quite hit him where he wanted it to hit him, until one day one of his friends told him about Mother Teresa. And reading about how Mother Teresa interacted with the poor really hit him at a level that made him feel like that's what following Jesus truly means. And the best part of this chapter in Shane's whole story is where he talks about what he did in inner city Philadelphia, how he and a bunch of his college student friends went to this area of inner city Philadelphia where the homeless hung out, and he got to know them, because in the words of Mother Teresa, you don't know poverty until you know the poor, and you got to get down there in the dirt and really engage with them in a way that allows you to walk in their walk and know what it really means to live the way that they live, because that's really what Jesus did. The rest of the book tells in more detail the whole story, and I won't go into a lot of details here, but suffice it to say that he felt like he really started to get what it meant to be a follower by hanging out with the poor there. The Mother Teresa quote at the end says, "In the poor we meet Jesus in the most distressing disguises." And he realized that he was more likely to meet him there than he was any place in the halls of academia or anywhere else. So I thought one of the things that might be interesting as we talk about Shane Claiborne stuff is to take a look at some of the ways the church happens here in Washington, D.C. I went over to the Washington National Cathedral, which is affiliated with the Episcopalian Church and is where presidents often go to worship. It's kind of one of the iconic landmarks, architectural pieces in all of Washington, D.C. And it is a classic old school cathedral. You can see this is how the church has really built up all the symbols and all the history and the ridiculous amounts of money that we invested in building a place. So the question I ask myself as I walk around this place is this what Jesus was all about? Does this look like a place where a radical, a crazy guy would hang out with tax collectors and prostitutes? This is the radical guy we're talking about. By contrast, I'm going to show you some pictures of the church I'm hanging out at now in Washington called Luther Place. Not saying it's perfect or that the Lutheran Church always gets it, but this is an urban congregation in the heart of a really needy area of downtown Washington, D.C., and they do some really cool stuff. Their theme is that the place is always open. They have a history of providing shelters for all different kinds of folks. And their messaging is all about inclusivity and targeting folks like Martin Luther King and the messages of people that seem to resonate a little more with what a real follower of Jesus would look like. And these are some of the folks at Luther Place, and this is Luther Place doing church. We had a festival of the soul, or the Soul Fest we called it last weekend, to help out some of the homeless folks and a shelter that we work with across the street. So I leave you with a question. Take a look at how we're doing church here. It's not perfect, but ask yourselves, what is our responsibility as young folks today if we're going to be followers of Jesus? What do we do? How do we church? How do we live? Where do we live? And what do we do with this faith that we've been given?